So we're beginning with a woman to be remembered. That is Lot's wife. Lot was the nephew of Abraham. When Abraham left Haran to go to Canaan, as the Lord had spoken to him, Lot went with him. Lot accompanied Abraham on his journeys. Even when Abraham went up from Egypt to Bethel, Lot was with him. But Abraham and Lot had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to support both of them along with their possessions. Moreover, there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's flocks and herdsmen of Lot's flocks. So they could not dwell together. So Lot separated from Abraham. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered. Lot chose for himself what he believed to be the best land. Yet this was the territory of Sodom and Gomorrah, two of the most perverse and wicked cities at that time. Lot pitched his tent near Sodom, while Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan. That's in Genesis 13:10-12. But Lot gradually moved into Sodom. One evening, Lot was visited by two angels who spent the night in his house. From there, we go to Genesis 19, verses 15-26, which I'm going to read to you. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Verse 18. Then Lot said to them, "Please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live." And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen upon the earth. Verse 23. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:15-26. The Bible does not give us any description about Lot's wife, where she came from, who she was, not even her name. Interestingly, Scripture does not mention Lot's wife until two angels visited them and urged the family to leave. That's in Genesis 19, verse 15. One can safely assume that Lot was married to his wife sometime after he had left Haran. Scripture mentions Sarah, Abraham's wife, by name, but is silent about Lot's wife. Yet in Luke 17, verse 32, Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. In Luke 17:32, Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. What are we to remember about her?
Yes.
Number one, Lot's wife was privileged to be married to a righteous man. Really? Righteous? Lot? In Genesis account of Lot's movements, we read that Lot first chose the fertile plains near Sodom. Genesis 13, verse 10. Then he pitched his tent outside Sodom. Genesis 13:12. Eventually, he moved into the city itself. Genesis 14:12. Chapter 19 opens with him sitting in the gate of Sodom, the place where the city elders held court. That means Lot was part of Sodom's council of elders, which meant that he knew what was going on there in the city, even though he could do nothing to stop the pervasive sin. But he knew what was going on. In Genesis 13:13 tells us that the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. Lot lived in Sodom for a good number of years. Yet the Apostle Peter calls him a righteous man. Look at 2 Peter 6-8. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing them. Even though Lot lived in Sodom, even though he was part of the system of Sodom, the culture of Sodom, he still calls him a righteous man. And that was because of his faith in the Lord, not because of his works. So Lot's wife was privileged to be married to a righteous man. Number two, Lot's wife had the opportunity to get to know the God of Lot. Having been married to Lot for many years, she would have been well acquainted with the God that Lot served. She had Abraham as her uncle and could have learned a lot from his example. She must have been there when her husband was taken captive by Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and delivered. She must have seen how God's power delivered him. So Lot's wife had the opportunity to get to know the God of Lot. Point number 3. Lot's wife had the privilege of entertaining angels of God in her home. She certainly was privileged to have angels of God visit her home. She saw the miracle that the angels performed in striking the men, both small and great, who were outside their doorway. She saw them. She saw them striking them with blindness. It was all God's grace extended to her. She had no excuse whatsoever. Then why was Lot's wife punished? Was Lot's wife punished just because she glanced over her shoulder? No, she was not punished just for glancing over her shoulder. He was punished. Lot's wife looked back in unbelief.
Yeah.
When exhorting Lot and his family to leave Sodom, the two angels had specifically told them that they should not look behind. That's in Genesis 19:17. God had spoken through the angels and he would perform what he said. To look back was a sign of unbelief. She had to commit the fate of Sodom to God, but she didn't. So why was she punished? The first point is that she looked back in unbelief. Secondly, she looked back in disobedience.
Yeah.
God had specifically said, don't look behind you or stay anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains and don't turn around. Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. This shows us God's attitude towards disobedience. So she looked back in unbelief, she looked back in disobedience. Lot's wife was probably attached to Sodom. Many commentators say that she grew up in Sodom. Her action of looking back was not a simple action, but rather a heart attitude and an allegiance to Sodom that prompted her to look back. The Hebrew word employed by the angels in their warning and in the statement afterwards that Lot's wife looked back is not it's a very unusual word. It's a very unusual verb. It's not used regularly. It's employed to denote an action where one is looking or seeing, but looking at something with desire, looking at something with longing, looking at something with confidence, looking at something with approval. Abraham himself looked at Sodom, but Abraham was not turned into a pillar of salt. Why? Because the verb used for Abraham's looking was the common verb. He looked back. He looked at Sodom more because of a concern for Lot and his family, not the type of looking expressed by Lot's wife. She was punished. Then why are we to remember Lot's wife? The number one and the most important thing is the return of the Lord will be sudden and unexpected. Look at Luke 17 verses 28 to 33. I'm going to read it out. Luke 17 verses 28 to 33. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it took fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. Verse 33. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. The Bible is full of solemn warnings, some more direct than others. Jesus' names in this context, none are more subtle than the one given by Jesus in Luke 17 verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. It is a serious warning when we think of the person that Jesus names in this context. He singles out a rather obscure woman. He doesn't even mention her name. But he does give us but we do know that she was irretrievably lost in disobedience.
Yeah.
The context of Jesus' words in Luke 17 is the judgment of God. God is ready to judge as he judged Sodom and Gomorrah. He is ready to judge sin. And this woman stands as a vital lesson to us. The sudden coming of the Son of Man, that's Jesus, leaves no time even for a quick gathering of possessions from one's house. This calls for a decision we have to make between earthly possessions, earthly goals, and eternal values. What we value most, whether we are living for eternity or whether we are living for this world. Lot's wife was reluctant to leave her old life. She looked back at Sodom with longing. Genesis 19, verse 26. What the Sodomites were engaged in was just the ordinary and innocent occupations of life. Eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building. Though the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were awfully wicked, it is not just the wickedness, but their worldliness, their unbelief, their indifference to God, their unpreparedness that is here held up as a warning to us. The return of the Lord will be sudden and unexpected. Will you be ready for him? Will you be ready for the Lord? James 4:4 says, Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. In 1 John 2:15 it says, do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. You need to make a choice between worldly ambitions or things that have eternal value. That's your choice for today in your life. However, though Lot's wife was punished suddenly and irretrievably, when she looked back, she was deprived of the chance to be saved. All the mercy that was once extended to her was suddenly removed. The Bible reveals the natural consequences of her choice. However, God is compassionate and merciful. The same passage in Genesis 19, where we read about Lot's wife, tells us that God is compassionate and merciful. We have hope in our God. Lot was warned by the angels that the land was to be destroyed and to leave immediately. Lot had by this point been living in Sodom for a number of years. Why do I say that? Lot had left Haran for the land of Canaan when Abraham was 75 years old. That's in Genesis 12:4. Whereas Abraham was now 99, Genesis 17:1. The two angels carried out their mission by warning Lot to flee the city and bring out with him his sons-in-law, his sons, daughters, and whomsoever was part of his family. Genesis 19:12-16. The term sons-in-law, that's 19:14, is applied here to the men of Sodom who were to marry Lot's daughters. That is, the men who were betrothed to his daughters, to whom the marriage was yet to be completed. The males, however, these men, connected with Lot's household, rejected the appeal, thinking he was just fooling, he was making fun. Even Lot himself lingered in spite of being warned. The Bible tells us that in the passage we read in Genesis 19, that Lot lingered. Eventually, Lot's wife and his daughters fled with him. But this was not necessarily because they believed him or desired to leave Sodom or they wanted to obey God. It was just because of God's compassion. The two angels seized them by their hands and forced them out of the city. By all accounts, God was merciful to include Lot's wife in the command to evacuate before the destruction. At the conclusion of Lot's rescue, he requested shelter in the nearby city of Zoar. Zoar was in the plains of Jordan and it was to be destroyed. Besides Sodom and Gomorrah, God was going to destroy the plains of Sodom. But the Lord was compassionate and merciful. He heard Lot's prayer. Lot's rescue was a result of Abraham's prayer. Abraham had entreated the Lord for Sodom, and Lot had also requested to live in Zoar. God had promised Abraham not to destroy the city on behalf of their righteousness. So though Sodom was destroyed, Zoar was saved from destruction because of Lot, the righteous man living in it. So coming to the last part of our message, what are the lessons we learn from this story about Lot's wife? Number one, don't look back at your past. Press forward to what God is calling you to do. Lot's wife was so entangled with Sodom that she could not leave without glancing back with longing to what she was leaving behind. She became a pillar of salt. Number two, backsliding is gradual. Remember, Lot looked at Sodom, up his tent near Sodom. Then he went into Sodom, and finally he was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When we are convicted about the sin in our lives, there is no time for delay. We must flee from it immediately. God always makes a way to escape. Now, point number three. The Lord's return will be sudden and unexpected. Luke 17:31 says, we are warned concerning God's judgment. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them. Lot, however, requested shelter in the nearby city of Zoar. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Similarly, if you read the stories of many who are killed or injured by house fires, are those who go back into the houses, into the blaze to save valuables. The Lord's return will be sudden and unexpected. Are you ready to meet him? Are you ready to meet him? Point number 4, we are to set our mind on things above, not on things on the earth. That's in Colossians 2. That means our goals should be eternal for this life. We should not live for this world. We have to live for eternity. Ironically, by becoming a pillar of salt, Lot's wife became an eternal part of Sodom. John Gill, in his exposition of the Bible, noted that Josephus wrote that the pillar continued even in his times, and he saw it. Additionally, Irenaeus and Tertullian, who are normally called our church fathers, they speak of it as in their times, a thing that was incredible. The last point that I want to make. A strong woman builds a strong family. Genesis 15 to 26, the passage of our discussion today. A strong woman builds a strong family. Genesis 19:15 to 26, which is our passage of discussion today, vividly and tragically illustrates the potential danger of surrounding oneself with wicked society. surrounding ourselves with wicked friends, living in a wicked society. Lot's two daughters had been born and reared in Sodom, as it may be inferred from the fact that they were of marriageable age, as in Genesis 19:8 and 14, which in the Bible typically applies to women in their early teens. Whereas Lot had by this point been living in Sodom for a good number of years. Of course, simply living in a wicked society does not mean that one's children will turn out bad. Isaac, for example, grew up in the land of Canaanites, but he was good. The problem lies in the degree to which the family unit itself, the parents in particular, fit in with the surrounding culture, which will impact the children's spiritual and moral development. In this instant, Lot's wife, the mother of their daughters, was herself from Sodom. This would explain why she looked back at Sodom with longing, for she did not want to leave. Also, their husbands-to-be had died, were destroyed along with Sodom, and in the absence of any other prospective husbands, the Lot's daughters, being children of Sodom in the moral and spiritual and cultural sense, got their father drunk and lay with him. And what happened? Out came two sons, Ami and Moab, and they became the head of two tribes who were the enemies of Israel. In the Bible, we have many examples of strong women. Hannah, if you look at Hannah, Hannah was a woman strong in prayer. She raised Samuel amongst a wicked priesthood, who was the last of Israel's judges and the first of Israel's prophets. Then there was Mary, the mother of Jesus, strong in the word, whose Magnificat had more than 13 references to the Old Testament. Her son James became the head of the Jerusalem church after the resurrection, and another son, Jude, wrote an epistle. But the Bible, these are women who are married, but what about the single women? The Bible also names single women who were strong in the Lord. What comes to my mind is Mary of Bethany, who was always pictured at the feet of Jesus. She listened to the spoken word, she worshipped the living word, and she read the written word. Her sister Martha and brother Lazarus, were devoted disciples of Jesus. The conclusion of this is, losing your life to Christ is victory. In Luke 17:32-33, Jesus concludes, remember Lot's wife. His life, lose it. And whoever loses his life will preserve it. As you follow after God, ladies, know that every bit of his word is for you. His promises are worth looking forward, looking toward, holding on to, and learning from them every day. Thank you.